She grabbed the most feared duke in the north by the arm, called him her husband to a room full of strangers, and prayed the man who had bought her would not see her hands shaking. Now, let us dive in. The frost had come early to Ravenscar that winter, and with it came the man who owned her. Rosalind Crane had 11 shillings, a dead father's logbook sewn into the lining of her cloak, and exactly 1 hour before Silas Roper realized she had run. She had counted it out on the mail coach the way she counted everything, by the inch, by the plate, by the cut of a line into copper. Her father had taught her that a chart was only ever as honest as the hand that engraved it, and that a forged seal always trembled at the third stroke. She had not known, at 24, that those same eyes would one day be the only thing standing between her and a quiet death in a locked country house. The marriage settlement her uncle had signed did not say death, of course. It said provision. It said the protection of Mr. Silas Roper, shipping contractor for the person and property of Miss Rosalind Crane. But she had read the clause buried under the provision, the one that signed away her father's unpublished Admiralty chart plates the moment the vows were spoken, and she had understood at last what she was. She was not a bride. She was the brown paper around a parcel, and the parcel was a dead man's maps, and once the maps were delivered, the paper would be thrown into the fire. So she ran, and the running had brought her here, half frozen, to the lantern-lit doorway of a chapel in a town she did not know, with Roper's hired man not 40 feet behind her in the crowd, and the most dangerous man in Yorkshire standing directly in her path. Why had he been standing there at all? Why had the Duke of Ravenscar, who the whole coast swore had let his own household die behind his cursed walls, come down to a common subscription chapel on the night she happened to need a husband? She did not know yet, but she was about to seize his arm and find out. If a story of a desperate woman, a cold and cursed duke, and a lie that became the truest thing either of them ever owned is the kind of story that warms you on a winter night, then take one moment now and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. Give this a like, share it with someone whose heart needs a little mending, and tap the notification bell so the next story finds you. Welcome to the family. Now let us begin where it truly began, with a woman out of time, and a stranger she was about to claim as her own. The chapel of St. Hilda stood on the cliff edge above the harbour, and on the night Rosalind ran into it, the sea below was the colour of cooling iron. A subscription gathering had drawn half the town in out of the cold, a winter charity service and the supper that followed it, surveyors and shipowners, Trinity House men in their good coats, a scattering of the gentry who still bothered to come down to the coast in winter. Rosalind had slipped in behind a party of latecomers, through the lantern-lit porch, her cloak white with sleet, and she had walked the length of the long aisle with her chin up and her heart slamming, because a girl who hurried was a girl who had something to hide. She had nearly reached the far doors when she heard the voice she had run 30 miles to escape. "There," said the hired man, low and certain, somewhere behind her. "The grey cloak, that is her." She did not turn. Turning was confession. She let her eyes travel the room the way her father had taught her to read a plate, fast, total, looking for the one true line in a field of noise, and what she found was a man. He stood alone against a cold stone pillar at the head of the nave, as men stood when the crowd had agreed to leave a space around them. He was tall, dark-haired, perhaps 30-odd, dressed in black so plain it was its own kind of arrogance. He was watching the door she had come through with an attention that had nothing social in it. He looked like a man waiting to recognize someone. He looked, she thought wildly, like the only fixed point in a room full of people drifting away from him. She had perhaps 4 seconds. She used them. She crossed to him on legs that did not feel like hers, and she put her gloved hand around his forearm as if she had done it 1,000 times, and she turned her face up to his with all the bright, brittle ease of a wife who had been kept waiting. "There you are, husband," she said. "You are late." She felt the muscle of his arm go still beneath her hand, not stiff but still, the way the sea goes still before it changes its mind. Up close his eyes were a grey so pale they were nearly colourless, and they came down to her with the speed of a man who had caught a lie in the air and was deciding what to do with it. He did not pull away. That was the first thing she would remember after for the rest of her life. A stranger's hand closed on the arm of the most feared man on the coast, and he let it stay. "Am I?" he said. It was not a question. It was a held breath. Behind her she heard the hired man's footsteps falter. heard the small confusion of a hunter whose certainty had just acquired a husband. "You are," she said, and she smiled at the Duke as though her whole life did not depend on the next word out of his mouth. "I've been standing by the door for a quarter of an hour. People will think you have abandoned me." For one heartbeat his glance moved past her, to the man in the doorway, to the hand drifting toward the inner pocket where men kept papers. The Duke read it all. She watched him read it, and then his gaze came back to her, and something behind it had decided. "Forgive me," he said, his voice dropping into a register meant to carry just far enough. He laid his free hand over hers where it gripped his arm, and his palm was warm, and the warmth of it nearly undid her. "I was detained. You know how these men talk." He turned them both a quarter turn, smoothly, so that her back came to the room and his shoulder rose between her and the door. "Come, you are half frozen. Whatever you have run from, it does not come past me." She had not told him she had run from anything. "I do not know your name," she breathed, still smiling, because her face had to keep smiling. "Tobias Calvert," he said, "Duke of Ravenscar." A pause, very dry, pitched for her alone. "You may go on calling me husband. It seems to be working." Behind them, the hired man had stopped. A duke was a wall a paid agent did not climb without orders, and his orders had not anticipated a wall. Rosalind heard him retreat, heard it in the loosening of the crowd, the resumption of ordinary noise, and her knees chose that moment to remember how frightened she was. The Duke felt it. Of course he felt it. His hand was over hers. Without any change in his face, he turned her toward the side passage, signalled to a servant with 2 fingers, and walked her out through the chapel porch as if escorting a wife to her carriage were the most natural thing in his cold and cursed world. In the passage, away from the candle glare, he stopped and looked at her properly for the first time. She made herself meet it. She had answered worse than a duke's stare. She had answered her uncle's lawyer across a table while her whole future was sold beneath her, and she had not wept then either. "Now," Tobias Calvert said, "you will tell me your name, and you will tell me the truth, because I will know at once if you do not." "I always do." "Rosalind Crane," she said, "and I am not your wife." "No," he agreed, "you are not. You are a woman who walked into the one room on this coast where that man could not follow you, and you made the only move on the board that bought you another hour." His head tilted a fraction. "That was not luck. You chose me." "Why?" "Because you were the only person here that everyone else had stepped away from," she said. "I reasoned that a man no one will stand near is a man no one will dare to question." For a long moment he said nothing. Then something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, but was related to one by blood. "That," said the Duke of Ravenscar, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 3 years." The man behind her was Roper's. The Duke had known it before she told him, and when she did, she watched the name land on him, like a stone dropped into a deep well, the surface barely moving, while everything below it shuddered. "Silas Roper," he repeated. "You know him." "I know him." 2 words, and a coldness came off them that had nothing to do with the winter. "Tell me the rest. All of it. Quickly." So she told him, there in the passage, in the clipped and orderly way she did everything. Her father had been an Admiralty hydrographic engraver, one of the men who cut the coast into copper so that ships might not drown, and he had died in the autumn leaving debts and 3 uncut plates of a survey no one else possessed. The Deepwater Soundings Trinity House wanted for its new contract. Her uncle had settled those debts with Silas Roper, and signed her into marriage in the same stroke of the pen, and the marriage was a fiction wrapped around a theft, because the settlement signed the plates to Roper the instant she was wed. She had read the clause herself, and she told him what she believed Roper meant to do with her once the plates were his, without drama, the way you reported a sounding, a fact, a depth, a danger. "He means to make me disappear," she said, "confined somewhere quiet, a nervous girl, prone to fancies. It is cheaper than a wife, and it cannot testify." The Duke's jaw had set. "And the proof of the clause? The settlement?" "My father's clerk has it. Mr. Hale Bevan. He helped me run. He is to wait at the Black Anchor for word from me, or to come on without me in 3 days if no word comes. Then he will come on tomorrow," Tobias said, "because you will send him word tonight, from my house, where you are going to stay." She had been braced for many things. She had not been braced for that. "Your Grace." "Tobias." "Your Grace," she said again, deliberately, because she was not going to be moved an inch by a man she had known for 10 minutes. "I claimed you in a doorway to escape one cage. I am not such a fool as to walk straight into another. What is it that you want? She saw it surprise him. Not the spine, she thought, but that she had aimed it so exactly. He studied her a moment longer, and when he spoke his voice had changed again, gone quiet and almost careful. "What I want," he said, "is the man who bought you. I have wanted him for 4 years, and you have just walked into my hands carrying the first piece of paper that could hang him. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise." He paused. "And I find I do not want him to have you. You may make of that what you like, but you will not sleep tonight under any roof he can reach, and mine is the only roof on this coast he cannot." She should have said no. Every careful instinct she owned said no. But her cloak was wet through, and somewhere out in that frozen town Silas Roper was being told that his property had acquired a husband, and the man in front of her had not once in 10 minutes reached for her, or talked over her, or told her to calm herself. "On conditions," she said. The corner of his mouth moved again. "Of course." Ravenscar Hall stood a mile up the cliff road, a fortress of sea-grey stone with the wind for a moat, and the town had a saying about it that the Duke's own coachman repeated without apology as they drove up through the dark, that folk crossed to the far side of the road sooner than walk beneath its windows, because the family that lived there had died behind them, and the master had let it happen. She did not ask. A woman who had just been called brown paper around a parcel did not throw stones at another's reputation. The housekeeper met them at the door as though half-frozen runaways arrived nightly. Mrs. Ottridge was a square, grey woman, with a face like a closed ledger, and she took in Rosalind's wet cloak and white face, and the Duke's clipped instruction without a single visible thought. "The old chart room," Tobias said. "It has a fire and a lock she can hold from the inside. Miss Crane will tell you what she needs. She has come a long way, and she will not be troubled tonight by anyone, on any pretext, including me." "Very good, Your Grace," said Mrs. Ottridge, and to Rosalind in exactly the same tone, "You will want hot water and something with weight to it. Come along then. The stairs are wicked cold, mind the third one." The chart room had been her father's kind of room, and walking into it she felt her throat close. It was a high stone chamber lined with the shallow drawers that held charts laid flat, a great sloped table beneath the window, a bed made up against the inner wall and the fire built high. On the wall hung a chart of the northern coast, beautifully cut, and her engraver's eye went to it before her frightened one could stop it. She saw the maker's mark in the corner, and her breath caught. It was her father's work, a crane plate 10 years old hanging on the wall of the man who had just taken her in. She did not sleep much, but she slept, which she had not expected, and when she woke the sea was grey in the window, and the lock had held, and for the first time in a month no one owned the next hour of her life but herself. Mr. Hale Bevan arrived the following afternoon in a hired gig, frozen to the bone and clutching a leather satchel as though it were an infant. He was a narrow, ink-stained man of 50 with a stammer that worsened when he was frightened, and vanished entirely when he spoke of copper and acid, and the sight of Rosalind alive and unharmed undid him so completely that he had to sit down on the hall bench and put his face in his hands. "I thought," he managed, "when you did not come the first night, I thought he had—" "He did not," she said, kneeling by him. "Hale, look at me. I am here. You did everything right." The Duke had come into the hall behind her, silent in the way she was already learning to listen for, and Bevan startled up off the bench at the sight of him, and then went very still, because even a frightened clerk knew the Duke of Ravenscar by reputation, and the reputation said run. "You are the man who kept her father's papers," Tobias said. It was not a threat, but Bevan flinched anyway. "Sit down. You have nothing to fear in this house, and a great deal of work to do in it." He looked at the satchel. "Is the settlement there?" "The marriage settlement, with the clause." Bevan looked at Rosalind. She nodded. "It is here, Your Grace," Bevan said. And more than that, I took what I could carry. I took the master's logbook, the one with the soundings worked out by hand, the ones the uncut plates are drawn from. If Roper has copied the survey, Your Grace, the logbook is the proof of it, because no man could fake the master's working. The corrections are in his own hand, the dead ends, the places he sounded twice. His voice had steadied entirely, the stammer gone, the way it always went when he spoke of the work. A forger can copy a finished line. He cannot copy a dead man thinking. Rosalind watched the cold thing in the Duke's face settle into something colder and more patient, and understood that she had not, in fact, walked into the hands of a man who wanted to rescue her. She had walked into the hands of a man who had been building a case for 4 years, and had just been handed its keystone. "Mr. Bevan," Tobias said, "how would you like to be employed again?" "You should know," Rosalind said that evening, "that I do not intend to be a piece on your board." They were in the map library, which Mrs. Ottridge had shown her that afternoon with the first flicker of approval the housekeeper had yet permitted herself. It was the finest room Rosalind had ever stood in. 2 stories of shelving, a gallery, a long table scarred by generations of dividers, and light, even in winter, from a great north window that a draftsman would have wept for. The Duke was at the table when she came in, a chart unrolled beneath his hands, and he had not been surprised to see her, which she was beginning to find was simply how he was. "You have made that clear," he said. "3 times now. I will make it a 4th if I must." She came to the opposite side of the table. The chart between them was the coast off Ravenscar, the very water her father had spent his last good year sounding. "You want Roper. You have wanted him longer than you have known me. Whatever shelter you are giving me, some part of it is bait in a war I did not start. I would rather you said so to my face than have me find it out later and feel a fool." He looked up at her then, and there was something in his face she had not seen before, a kind of arrested attention, as if she had said aloud a thing he had expected to have to hide for weeks. "You are remarkably difficult to manage," he said. "I have been managed by experts," she said. "I have decided I do not care for it." The thing at the corner of his mouth came and went. "Then here is the truth, since you have asked for it plainly. 4 years ago, Silas Roper held a debt over a man's guardian, exactly as he now holds one over yours. The man was my sister's husband, chosen for her, signed for her, by an uncle who needed Roper's money. Margaret." He said the name as if setting down something heavy he had carried a long way. She was 19. She did not want the marriage, and she said so, and so they declared her nervous, hysterical, prone to fancies. His hand had gone flat on the chart. She was confined for her own good, and she was dead within the year, of a fever no one sent for a physician to treat, while I was 800 miles away charting a coast for the Admiralty and reading her letters 3 weeks after she wrote them. The last one asked me to come home. I came home too late. The fire spoke into the silence. Rosalind found she had put her hand to her own throat. "That is why," she said slowly, "you did not pull away, in the doorway, when I said the words. You said husband," Tobias said, "to escape a man who buys women and calls it provision and confines them when they object. And then you told me his name." He looked at her steadily. "I did not let the lie stand to save you, Miss Crane. Not at first. I let it stand because for 4 years I have wanted a single thread connecting that man to a single crime, and you walked into a chapel and put it in my hand. That is the ugly truth, and you asked for it, and I will not pretend it was gallantry." She should have been frightened of him. He had just told her she was useful to him, but what she felt, standing in the cold library with the dead between them, was far more dangerous than fear. She felt seen. He had told her she was a piece on his board, and in the same breath refused to lie about it, the one thing every man in her life had always done. "Then we want the same man ruined," she said. "Good. We will be very efficient." She put her own hand flat on the chart, mirroring his, and looked at him across the dead man's coast. "But hear my condition, because it is the only one that matters, and I will hold you to it. I will play your wife, but I will not be lied to inside the lie. Whatever this is between us, the war, the bait, the rest of it, you tell me the truth of it as it happens. Every time, even when it does not flatter you. That is my price. The truth. Always." He was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened, and he did something she would not have predicted. He came around the table and he held out his hand to her across the small remaining distance, the way men shook on a contract. "The truth," he said. "Always. You have my word, Miss Crane, and I do not give it lightly, because I have so little else left that I value." She put her hand in his. It was warm again, and his grip was exact, neither crushing nor slack, the grip of a man taking the measure of a thing he meant to keep honest. "Then we have an arrangement," she said. "We have an arrangement," he agreed. And then, dry as the winter air, "Wife." The work was how they fell, though neither of them would have named it that for weeks. It began the next morning, when Bevan unpacked the satchel onto the long table in the map library, and the 3 of them, Duke, engraver's daughter, ink-stained clerk, bent over the late John Crane's logbook and his 3 uncut plates, and the copy of the survey that Roper had submitted to Trinity House, obtained by the Duke through a clerk who owed him a favour. Rosalind had cut copper since she was 9 years old. She had watched her father work a plate the way other girls watched their mothers at the pianoforte, and she had a thing he had not lived to see fully grown, an eye that could lay two impressions side by side in her mind and find the place where they disagreed. "Here," she said on the second day, and the word came out of her with such certainty that both men leaned in. She had the logbook open to a page of soundings off a headland called the Wolf, and Roper's submitted chart beside it. "He has the depths. Look, they are my father's depths to the fathom all the way along the channel. But here, at the Wolf, my father sounded, and then struck it out." She set her finger on the logbook, on a column of figures barred through with a single firm line. "He found a false bottom, a bank that moved. He sounded it 3 times over 2 days, and he marked it not to be trusted, resurvey in summer. He died before the summer." She looked up, "and Roper's chart shows clean water there. 11 fathoms, dredged and certain, fit to bring a frigate through." Tobias had gone very still. "Meaning?" "Meaning he copied a finished plate and never read the working," Rosalind said. "A real surveyor would have known the Wolf was unfinished because he would have done the sounding. Roper took a dead man's lines and dressed them as his own, and put 11 fathoms of safe water over a bank that has wrecked 4 colliers in living memory." She sat back. "If a ship trusts that chart, men will drown on my father's stolen work. He did not only rob the dead, he set a trap for the living and signed it in another man's name." The silence in the library was complete. Then the Duke did something she had not seen him do. He laughed, once, short, without much humour in it, but real. "4 years," he said. "I have been looking for a way to put a rope around that man's neck, and you have found it in 2 days with a column of crossed-out numbers." He shook his head slowly. "Your father taught you well, Miss Crane." "My father taught me that the truth is in the corrections," she said. "Any fool can copy the answer. Only the man who did the work has the mistakes." Bevan, across the table, was looking at her with shining eyes. "She is better than he was, Your Grace," he said. "I never told her, but she is. The master could read a forged seal. Miss Rosalind can read the mind of the man who cut it." She had not known the clerk thought that. She had to look down at the logbook a moment and breathe. When she looked up, the Duke was watching her with the look of a man who had spent 4 years certain the best thing left in his life was revenge, and had just begun to suspect he was wrong. They worked through the short days and into the long evenings, and the library became the warmest room in that cold house. Bevan went home each night, but Rosalind and the Duke stayed past any reasonable hour, 2 chairs drawn near the fire and the dead man's plates between them, and somewhere in those hours the thing they were building stopped being only a case. She learned that he was not cold. He was exact, which the town had mistaken for coldness, because the town was lazy. He chose his words the way she chose a graving tool, the smallest one that would do the work, and once she understood that, his silences stopped frightening her and started to interest her. He had loved the sea. The years of charting had been the only time he was happy, and he had given it up when Margaret died, because a man could not hunt a murderer from 800 miles away. He learned, she suspected, that she was not brave. She told him so on the 4th or 5th night, when he said something dry about her nerve in the chapel. "I was not brave," she said. "I was out of choices. There is a difference, and I would thank you to remember it, because if you build your good opinion of me on courage I do not have, you will be disappointed when it fails. You read a forged seal and saw a drowned crew before either of us saw a column of numbers," he said. "Call it what you like. I have served with brave men. Most of them could not have done it. That is not courage. That is only attention." "Miss Crane," said the Duke, "attention paid where everyone else looks away is courage. It is the only kind that has ever been any use to me." He turned a plate toward the firelight. "Do not argue. I am right, and you know I am right, and you are only arguing because you do not like to be praised, which is a different fault entirely, and we will address it another evening." She laughed before she could stop herself, really laughed the first time in longer than she could remember, and across the fire she saw it land on him, saw the small, startled pleasure of a man who had not made anyone laugh in years and had forgotten he could. "You are not what they say you are," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it is useful that they think so. A man no one will stand near is a man no one will dare to question." He gave her back her own words from the chapel, and she understood that he had remembered them word for word, and her heart did something it had no business doing for a man she was pretending to be married to. Silas Roper came to Ravenscar Hall on the 9th day. He came in his own carriage with his own crest newly painted on the door, a heavy, florid man of 50 in a coat too fine for the morning, with a lawyer and a magistrate's clerk, and the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone he could not buy. Rosalind watched the carriage come up the cliff road from the library window, and her body remembered fear before her mind did. Her hands had gone cold on the sill. The Duke was beside her in a moment. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and he looked down at the carriage with an expression of such calm interest that her own breathing steadied to match it. "He is early," Tobias said. "He has heard about the husband, and he could not wait." "Good. Frightened men make mistakes, and a man who comes to a duke's door uninvited is a frightened man pretending to be a confident one." He looked at her. "You do not have to see him. Mrs. Ottridge can turn him at the door, and he can shout at the stone for an hour and go home no wiser." "No," Rosalind said. The word surprised her. "No, he should see me. He should see that I am here and whole and not afraid." She lifted her chin. "Let him wonder how much I have already told you." Something flickered in the Duke's face, approval, and beneath it something fiercer that he kept leashed. "Then we will receive him together," he said. "And Rosalind." It was the first time he had used her name. "Whatever he says, however he says it, you say nothing you do not choose to say. He has no power in this house, none. He only has the power you hand him, and you will hand him nothing." They received Roper in the great hall, which Tobias had clearly chosen for its cold and its height, and the Duke sat while Roper was kept standing, and Rosalind stood at the Duke's shoulder, with her hands folded and her face composed, and her heart going like a hammer. Roper's eyes found her at once. "Rosalind," he said, with a warmth so false it turned her stomach. "My dear girl, you have led us a terrible chase. Your uncle is half out of his mind with worry." "My uncle," she said, "signed me to you to clear a debt of £3,000 and took a further note for the chart plate rights on top of it. He is not worried, Mr. Roper. He is merely unpaid." She felt, rather than saw, the Duke's stillness sharpen into something like satisfaction. Roper's florid face did not change, but a vein stood out at his temple. "There is a settlement," Roper said, turning to the Duke as one man of property to another, leaving the hysterical girl out of it. "A legal marriage settlement, signed and witnessed. The young woman is promised to me, your grace. I do not know what she has told you or what arrangement she imagines she has made here, but she is mine by contract, and I have come to take her home." "She is my wife," said the Duke. He said it without heat, without rising. The 4 words dropped into the cold hall like stones into a well, and Rosalind watched them strike Roper, and watched the lawyer's head come up sharply, and watched the whole confident edifice of the man falter for half a second. "That," Roper said, "is impossible. There was no banns, no license that I have found, no witnesses that anyone in this town will name. A marriage, your grace, is a matter of record, and I have looked at the record, and there is no record of you marrying anyone, let alone this." "You have been searching parish registers for my marriage," Tobias said. "How revealing, that a man come to collect a debt has spent his first 9 days hunting for a hole in another man's marriage instead." He rose then, unhurried, taller than Roper and making no point of it because he did not need to. "Be careful, Mr. Roper. A man who proves too eagerly that a marriage is false invites the question of why he needs it so badly to be." He let that sit. "We both know why. It is not the woman. It is the plates." The vein at Roper's temple was a cord now. "I do not know what slanders this engraver's chit has been pouring in your ear." "Have a care how you speak of my wife in my house," Tobias said, and now there was heat, a single flat current of it, and Roper shut his mouth. The Duke walked a slow step nearer. "You will go back down my road, and trouble no one in this town with searches, because the next parish clerk you attempt to lean upon will report it to me, and I subscribe to a great many parishes. You will await the Trinity House award like an honest contractor, since you are so confident of your survey." A pause, very soft. "And you will think, on the road home, about how much a dead engraver's daughter who can read a plate might know about the survey you submitted. I should like you to think about that a great deal." Rosalind saw it land, saw Roper understand, for the first time, that the girl was not the prize in this room but the danger in it. His eyes came to her with a new and naked calculation, and for one cold instant she saw all the way to the bottom of him, to the quiet country house and the locked door, and the fever no one would send for a physician to treat. "No one takes you," the Duke said. He had stepped, without seeming to, between her and that look. He said it to her, quietly, only to her, 4 words under the great cold vault of the hall, but he had timed it so that Roper heard, and meant him to, and the saying of it was both a comfort and a blade. Roper left rageful. He left threatening the law, the courts, the ruin of the Duke's good name, which made the lawyer wince and the Duke look bored. But he left, his carriage smaller going down the cliff road than it had seemed coming up, and when the sound of it had died away, Rosalind discovered she was shaking, and discovered the Duke had taken her cold hand and folded it between both of his without any ceremony at all. "You did not hand him a single thing," Tobias said. "You priced your uncle's debt to his face, and you did not blink. I have watched naval officers come apart under less." "He is going to do something," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "He came too easily, and he left too angry. Men like that do not go home and wait." "No," the Duke agreed. "They do not, which is exactly what we want, because a patient man is hard to hang, and a desperate one signs his own warrant." He looked down at her hand in his, and seemed to become aware of holding it, and did not let go. "He will move against the marriage, because the marriage is the wall he cannot climb, and he knows it now. He will look for a way to prove it false in front of the people who matter, and when he reaches for it," his jaw set, "we will be standing on better ground than he knows, because by then it will not be false." She looked up at him. The fire had not yet been built up. The hall was cold. His hands around hers were the only warm thing in it. "You mean for us to truly marry," she said. "I mean," Tobias said carefully, "for it to be your choice, made in the open, when you are not running from anyone and not frightened of anything, and able to walk away from me with your name clean and your father's plates your own. I will not have it said, I will not have you able to say, even to yourself, that you married me to escape him. That is his bargain. It will never be mine." He released her hand then, deliberately, as if to prove he could. "But, yes, I mean for it to be real. I have meant it for some days now, and I told you I would tell you the truth as it happened. So, there it is." She did not have an answer. Her whole life had been other men deciding what she was for, and here was one telling her, with his hands open, that the deciding was hers. It was the most frightening thing anyone had ever offered her, because there was nothing in it she could fight. "We must take care," he said, more lightly, stepping back to give her room, "not to believe our own performance. It is a great deal easier to play a thing than to choose it, and I should not like either of us to mistake the one for the other." "Then we will be careful," she said. Neither of them believed it for a moment. The hall gave a dinner, because a marriage that no one had witnessed must be witnessed by somebody, and the Duke's great-aunt arrived from York to see to it. Lady Honoria Calvert was 80 if she was a day, dressed 30 years behind the fashion and entirely unbothered by it. She had run Ravenscar Hall in the years the Duke was at sea, and had buried his sister with her own hands when he could not reach home in time, and she arrived already knowing a great deal more than anyone had written to her. She received Rosalind alone, in the morning-room, before she would allow the introduction to be made properly. "Sit," said Lady Honoria, and Rosalind sat. The old woman looked at her for a long, frank, unhurried while, the way a buyer looks at a horse, or a surveyor at a coast. "So, you are the girl who walked up to my great-nephew in a public room and called him husband in front of the whole of Ravenscar?" "I am," Rosalind said. There seemed no profit in denying it to this woman. "I was being hunted. He was the safest wall in the room. And he let it stand." Lady Honoria's gaze was faded but sharp and missed nothing. "Do you know, child, that he has not let anything stand in 4 years? Not a friendship, not a kindness, not a single soul who tried to come near him. He decided after Margaret that he would feel nothing, and he is stubborn enough to have nearly managed it." She folded her ancient hands, and then a frozen stranger grabbed his arm, and he let it stand. "I should like to know why before I lend my name to it." Rosalind chose the truth, because she had promised the Duke she would have it always, and could not hold to that, and lie to his great-aunt in the same breath. "Because I told him the name of the man who killed his sister," she said. "Silas Roper bought me the way he bought her. Your great-nephew did not shelter me out of charity, my lady. He sheltered me because I was useful to a war he has been fighting alone. He told me so himself. He has never once pretended it was anything kinder than that." She watched the old woman expecting disapproval, and instead Lady Honoria's hard face did something complicated and astonishing. It softened. "He told you that," she said. "He told you to your face that you were a piece in his game, and you are still here." "I am here because we want the same thing," Rosalind said, "and because he is the only man I have ever met who would rather tell me an ugly truth than a flattering lie. I have had a great deal of the second kind, my lady. I find I prefer the first." Lady Honoria was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and, with a dry old hand, lifted Rosalind's chin a fraction, studying her as she might a coin to test it. "You have spine," she said, "and you do not waste it weeping, and you made my great-nephew laugh in his own library. Yes, the servants tell me everything. Do not look so surprised. Now hear me, girl. That marriage of yours is a lie. I do not care. A lie in a good cause, ratified by the right people, becomes a fact, and I have been the right people in this county for 60 years. You will have your dinner and your witnesses. Lady Honoria Calvert will stand up before all of Ravenscar and call you her great-niece, and after that the only man fool enough to question it will be the man who needs it questioned, and he will look exactly as guilty as he is." She sat back, satisfied. "I know a true thing wearing a lie's coat when I see one, and I will not watch a roper put another Calvert girl in the ground." Rosalind found her eyes had filled, which she had sworn they would not do. "Why," she managed, "are you helping me?" "Because you are good for him, you tiresome child, and because I am old, and I have buried the gentle one, and I will be damned before I bury the cold one too." Lady Honoria rose with the creak of 80 winters, and her voice went brisk to cover what was under it. "Now, we must do something about your gown, because you cannot be presented as a duchess in a travelling dress, and we have 4 days. Ring the bell." The dinner was held in the long room of the assembly rooms above the harbour, and half the consequence of the coast came to it, drawn by curiosity sharper than the cold. The Duke of Ravenscar had a wife. The cursed Duke, the man who let his household die, had come down off his cliff with a young woman on his arm, and the formidable Lady Honoria at his other side, and society could not stay away from the spectacle of it. Rosalind walked into that room in dark green silk, with her father's logbook locked safe at the hall, and her hand on the Duke's sleeve, and this time the hand did not shake. "You are enjoying this," Tobias murmured, leaning to her ear as they crossed the room. "I can tell. You have the look of a woman reading a forged seal." "I am reading the room," she admitted, very low, smiling at a dowager who was staring openly. "Most of them believe we are scandalous, a few believe we are touching, and one woman by the second pillar has been looking at our marriage the way I look at a redated plate." She did not point. "The handsome one in the silver gown? She does not believe a word of it, and she is the only one here sharp enough to be dangerous." The Duke did not turn his head. "Lady Sabine Verrill," he said. "Her mother spent 2 seasons trying to make me marry her. She has reason to dislike a wife appearing out of a frozen night, with no wedding anyone attended." A dry breath. "You have a frightening eye, Rosalind. I should hate to be a forger in your acquaintance." "You should hate to be a liar in my acquaintance," she said. "Forgers I can respect. They at least do honest work dishonestly." He laughed, quietly, but she felt it through his sleeve, and she saw 3 separate people note that the cursed Duke of Ravenscar had laughed at something his wife said, and she understood that they had just done more to make the marriage real in the eyes of the coast than any parish register could. It was a strange evening, because the performance and the truth had begun to wear the same face. When the Duke laid his hand at the small of her back to steer her from a tedious conversation, it was a thing they had agreed he would do, and it was also simply his hand at the small of her back, and she had stopped being able to tell the agreed-upon from the real. She was performing a marriage, and she was also falling, in the most ordinary and irreversible way, in love with the man she was performing it with. She knew it for certain in the carriage home. They were alone in it. Lady Honoria had stayed in town with friends, and the lanterns swung and the cliff road unspooled black outside, and Rosalind was tired in the good way, the way of a hard thing done well, and she let her head rest against the cold leather and forgot to perform anything at all. "You did well tonight," Tobias said into the dark, and then, after a silence, in a different voice, lower, the voice he used when he was telling a truth he had not meant to, "I had forgotten what it was like, to go into a room knowing there was someone in it on my side." Rosalind opened her eyes. He was a shape against the lantern light, his face half turned to the window, and she said the true thing because she had promised always to. "You are not alone in this," she said. "Whatever happens with Roper, whatever it costs, you are not in it by yourself any more. I want you to know that, in case the part of you that decided 4 years ago to feel nothing has not yet been told." He was quiet for so long she thought she had overstepped. Then she felt his hand find hers on the seat between them, in the dark, without ceremony, and close around it. "It has been told," he said. "It is having difficulty believing it. Be patient with it." "I am very patient," she said, "with true things. It is only the lies I have no time for." The carriage swayed up the cliff road, and they did not let go of each other's hands the whole way home, and neither of them said another word, because there were none that would not have been smaller than the silence. The crisis came, as the worst things do, dressed as a small one. Lady Sabine Verrill paid a morning call 4 days after the dinner, ostensibly to congratulate the new Duchess, in fact to probe the seam she had found. She was clever and charming and relentless, and she asked with every appearance of friendly interest exactly the questions a marriage with no record could not answer. Where had they wed? Who had read the service? Surely there had been some small celebration. And Rosalind, who could read a forged seal, watched her own marriage being read for forgery by an expert, and parried, and felt the ground grow thin beneath her feet. It was Bevan who tipped it over, though he never meant to. He came up from the town that same afternoon, agitated, his stammer in full flood, and he found Rosalind in the library and could not get the words out fast enough. "He has been to my lodging," Bevan said. "Roper, or his men. The room was searched, Miss Rosalind. Your Grace, I beg pardon, I cannot. Searched while I was at the hall. They were looking for the logbook. They know it exists. They know what is in it. And there is a man been asking in the town, asking the old sexton at the parish, asking when the Duke was married and who stood witness, and offering coin for an answer. And the sexton, Miss Rosalind, the sexton will take the coin and say there was no marriage because there was no marriage. Bevan." She had her hands on his thin shoulders. "Bevan, breathe. Sit. When? When did the man ask the sexton?" "This morning. The award dinner, the Trinity House Award, is set for Thursday night, the contract to be given out, and Roper means to have it, and he means to break the marriage in front of all of them first, so that nothing the Duke says against him after will be believed." And there it was. She saw the whole shape of it at once, the way she saw a plate entire. Roper would attack the marriage publicly at the award dinner, discredit them as a duke and his kept woman playing at wedlock, so that when they produced the logbook to break his survey it could be dismissed as the spite of a discredited pair. He was not defending. He was attacking the witnesses before they could testify. It was, she thought with cold admiration, exactly how she would have done it. "Where is the Duke?" she said. "Riding the Sea Cliff Road. He does, in the afternoons. Mrs. Ottridge said." Rosalind was already moving. She found Tobias on the headland path above the grey churn of the sea, his horse walking, his face turned out to the water, and the sight of him there, alone, looking at the element he had given up, caught at her before she could speak. He turned at the sound of her, read her face in an instant the way he read everything, and swung down from the saddle. "What has happened?" she told him, fast and exact, and watched it land. And then she said the thing that had been forming in her since the library, the thing she had to say even though it would cost her, because she had promised him the truth always, and the promise cut both ways. "He is going to attack the marriage on Thursday," she said, "which means we must make it real before Thursday, or the logbook is worthless, and your sister goes unanswered. And I will not," her voice caught and she made it go on, "I will not do that, Tobias. I will not marry you on Wednesday to win a fight on Thursday. Do you understand me? You told me you would never have me able to say I married you to escape Roper. Well, I will not be able to say it, because it will not have been a marriage, it will have been a manoeuvre, and I would rather lose to him than win like that. I would rather hand him the contract than make the truest thing I have ever wanted into one more piece of paper on his board." The wind off the sea pulled at them both. He stood very still and she could not read him, and she was suddenly, horribly certain she had broken it. "You are telling me," Tobias said slowly, "that you would let the man who killed my sister win his contract, sooner than marry me for a reason that was not love." "Yes." The word tore something on the way out. "Yes, that is what I am telling you, because if I marry you to beat him, then he has decided it after all. He has made even this into a transaction, and I have spent my whole life being decided for, and I will not let him have this, the one thing that was going to be mine to choose. I would rather lose clean than win owned." She dashed the wind water from her eyes furiously. "There, that is the truth. You said you wanted it always. I find it is a great deal harder to give than to ask for." For a long moment, the only sound was the sea. Then the Duke crossed the space between them, and he took her face in both his cold hands, and he looked at her with the leashed, fierce thing in his eyes finally fully unleashed. "Rosalind Crane," he said, "I have spent 4 years certain that the best of me died with my sister, and that what was left was only good for putting her murderer in the ground. I had made my peace with being a man who was only good for that. His thumbs moved against her cheekbones. And then you grabbed my arm in a doorway, and you have spent 3 weeks refusing, at every turn, against your own interest, to let me make you into a thing. You will not be sheltered like a charity, or married like a maneuver, or saved like a damsel. You insist, you maddening woman, on being a person, with terms, who chooses. His voice dropped. You have just told me you would let Roper win sooner than let him cheapen us, that there is something between us worth more to you than the revenge I have organized my whole grief around. He drew a breath that shook, very slightly, the only unsteadiness she had ever seen in him. You have made me believe I am still worth choosing for myself. There is no gift in the world larger than that, and you have no idea you have given it. Tobias? So, no, he said. We will not marry on Wednesday to win on Thursday. We will beat him on Thursday with the truth, because the truth is enough. Your father's crossed-out numbers were always going to be enough, and the logbook needs no marriage to be believed, only to be read aloud by the one person on this coast who can read it. He smiled then, the whole rare thing, and it transformed his hard face entirely. And then, when he is finished and disgraced and there is nothing whatsoever to be gained by it, then, Rosalind, I am going to ask you to marry me, on a day with no use in it at all, for no reason but that I love you, and I want to, and you are free to say no. The sea crashed below them. She was crying, and did not care, and laughing too, both at once, the way the discord of her whole life had finally resolved into a single chord. You realize, she said, that you have just proposed to me by telling me you are not going to propose to me yet. I am aware of the irony, said the Duke of Ravenscar with enormous dignity, and I will thank you not to read it like a forged seal. The Trinity House Award dinner was held in the assembly rooms on a Thursday, so cold the harbour had begun to skin over with ice. The whole consequence of the coast came to it. Silas Roper came dressed like a man certain of a contract, and the Duke of Ravenscar came with his great-aunt on one arm and his wife on the other, and a leather satchel that Mr. Hale Bevan carried as if it were the crown jewels. Rosalind had dressed as a duchess and felt for the first time like one, not because of the silk, but because she had stopped pretending to be anything. She had spent 3 nights making the logbook ready, marking the pages, laying her father's barred and stubborn numbers where her hand could find them in an instant. She had been waiting, she understood, her whole life for a room in which the truth about a plate would matter more than the standing of the man who told it. The presentation was meant to be a formality. The chairman of the local Trinity House board, a portly, self-important man named Alderman Frith, who had taken Roper's dinners all autumn, rose to announce that the survey contract for the Ravenscar approaches, the deepening, the buoyage, the new chart of the coast, would be awarded to the firm of Mr. Silas Roper, on the strength of a survey of, he said, exceptional thoroughness and modern accuracy. Roper rose to a smatter of applause. He did not bow to the chairman. He turned instead to the room, and to the Duke's table, and Rosalind saw him decide to strike first exactly as she had known he would. "Before I accept this honour," Roper said, in the carrying voice of a man who had rehearsed, "I find I must address a matter that touches this board's good name." He spread his hands, regretful. "I have only a Christian concern for a young woman of my acquaintance, who has lately been presented to this county as his Grace's wife, though there is no record of any marriage. No banns were read. No licence has been found in any registry I have searched, and I put it to you, gentlemen, as honest men, what are we to make of a duke who parades a kept woman as a duchess, and who then attacks the survey of an honest contractor on the say-so of that same woman? Are we to take our charts now from the lips of—" "Yes," said Rosalind Crane, and stood. She had not planned to do it standing, nor the silence that fell when she did, the whole long room turning, the most powerful men on the coast looking at a young woman in dark green silk, who had risen at the Duke's table without leave. But on her feet she found that she was not afraid, because Roper had just made the single mistake she had been waiting 3 weeks for. He had invited the room to take its charts from her lips. "You wish the room to weigh whether I am to be believed," she said, and her voice carried, clear and unhurried, the voice of a woman reading a depth aloud. "Let us put it to a better test than my marriage, Mr. Roper. Let us put it to a chart. You have submitted to this board a survey of the Ravenscar approaches. You have claimed it as the modern, thorough work of your own firm. I am the daughter of John Crane, who was His Majesty's hydrographic engraver on this coast, and I have here his logbook, in his own hand, and I should like the board to compare the two. Publicly, now, before the contract is signed. She lifted her chin. If I am only a kept woman with a grievance, then I will be wrong about the numbers, and you will have your contract and my silence forever. But if I am right, then it will not matter in the least whether the Duke and I are married, will it? It will only matter that men are about to be sent to sea on a forgery. The room had gone utterly still. Alderman Frith, caught between the contractor whose dinners he had eaten and the Duke whose patronage he could not afford to lose, made a strangled noise and said that this was most irregular. "It is entirely regular," said Lady Honoria Calvert, rising in her 30-year-old silk with the authority of 60 years in the county. "A board charged with the safety of ships is asked to compare two charts before it endorses one. I cannot imagine what could be more regular. Sit down, Frith, and let the girl read." Bevan brought the logbook and the Duke's obtained copy of Roper's survey, and laid them on the long table where the candles were brightest, and Rosalind read. She read the way her father had taught her, finding the one true line in the field of noise. She took them to the headland called the Wolf, and she showed them Roper's chart, 11 fathoms, clean and dredged and fit for a frigate. And then she opened her father's logbook to the page where John Crane had sounded that water 3 times over 2 days, and barred his own figures through with a single firm stroke, and written, in a dead man's careful hand, "False bottom, bank shifts, not to be trusted, resurvey in summer." "A man who did this survey would know the Wolf was unfinished," she said into the silence, "because he would have stood in the boat and dropped the lead and felt it lie. Mr. Roper's chart copied the finished line and never read the working, because Mr. Roper never sounded a fathom of this coast in his life. He has painted 11 fathoms of safe water over a moving bank that has wrecked 4 colliers in the memory of men in this room." She looked up and found the faces of the seamen, the ones who had buried friends on that coast, and spoke to them. "Send a ship through the Wolf on this chart, and she will ground on a falling tide and break up before the boats can reach her. I am not asking you to believe me about a marriage, gentlemen. I am asking you to believe a man who is dead, in his own hand, about the water you sail." A murmur had begun among the seamen, low and ugly, the sound of men who knew the Wolf and had never trusted it, and had been about to be told by an alderman's contract that they were fools, and the Duke rose. "There is one more set of papers the board should see," Tobias said, "before it signs anything." He took them from Bevan's satchel and laid them down, one by one, with the unhurried precision Rosalind loved him for. The marriage settlement Mr. Roper's lawyer drew up, signed by one Crispin Crane, guardian, which conveys, in its 6th clause, the entire copyright of the Crane chart plates to Mr. Roper upon the marriage. Here, read the clause. It tells you what the marriage was for. A second paper. A promissory note, £5,000, from Silas Roper to Crispin Crane, dated 3 days before the settlement was signed, the bank draft that bought a man's niece and his dead brother's life's work in a single morning. The date is on it. It damns them both. And a third, and the receipt from the parish clerk of this town for the coin Mr. Roper's man paid him this very morning to swear there had been no marriage. He kept the receipt, the honest fellow, and brought it to me, because it transpires that a sexton who will take a bribe will also report one to a duke who subscribes to his parish. Roper had gone the colour of tallow. These are forgeries, slanders. The woman is a known. You are the expert on forgeries in this room, Rosalind said. You submitted one to this board. Shall we compare hands again? Yours is on the note. It came apart for him very fast after that, the way a forged seal comes apart at the 3rd stroke once you know to look. Alderman Frith, smelling which way the county's wind had turned, discovered an urgent regularity in withdrawing the contract pending investigation. The seamen were already crowded around John Crane's logbook, with the hunger of men who had nearly been made to drown their own. A magistrate who had come for the dinner found himself examining a £5,000 note with a damning date, and asking Mr. Roper to remain. Roper looked once at the door, and once at Rosalind, with that same naked bottom-of-the-well look she had seen in the great hall, and found the Duke standing between him and her again, without seeming to have moved. "No one takes her," Tobias said, for the second time and the last, quietly, only to him. "I told you that in my house. I will say it once more, here, in front of all of them, so there can be no mistake when this is written down. You will never again be in a room with my wife. You reached for a Calvert woman once before, and you put her in the ground. You will answer for that one in time. I have waited 4 years, and I can wait a little longer. But you will not reach for this one. Sit down, Mr. Roper. You are not going home tonight. He did not go home that night. Within the month, the Trinity House Board had struck his firm from its rolls and voided every contract bearing his name. The magistrate had committed him on charges of fraud that the £5,000 note made unanswerable, and the slower machinery of the law had begun at last to turn toward the older grave, toward a girl named Margaret, and a fever no one had sent a physician to treat. Crispin Crane, the uncle, fled the trade ahead of his own ruin. Stripped of his standing, his name a thing engravers spat after, and John Crane's plates, the true and finished work, were taken into the keeping of Trinity House itself, to be cut and published properly for the safety of ships. And on a grey afternoon a week after, with no fight left to win and no one left to escape and nothing in the world to be gained by it, the Duke of Ravenscar took the engraver's daughter back up to the headland where the cliff path ran above the sea, and he asked her on a day with no use in it at all. I told you I would do this, he said, when there was nothing to be won by it, and there is nothing to be won by it. Roper is finished, your name is clean, and I have had Lady Honoria's lawyer draw up a deed I mean to put in your hands, whatever your answer is, so that you will never wonder. He took her cold hands in his, on the cliff, with the grey water churning below. The plates are yours. The income is yours. So is the choice. Whatever you decide it free of me, free of debt, free of shelter, free of any single thing I could ever hold over you. His voice, which had begun steady, was not quite steady now. I have nothing left to offer you that you need, Rosalind, which is exactly why I am free to offer you the only thing I have that you do not. I love you. Marry me, or do not, and take the deed, and go and publish your father's coast under your own name, and be the freest woman on this shore. But I had to ask you on a day when you owed me nothing, because I could not bear to win you the way he tried to. She looked at the deed he pressed into her hands, the proof in paper that he had given away the one piece of leverage a man like Roper would have died holding, and at the sea her father had spent his life trying to make safe for other men, and at the cold, exact, broken and mending man who had let a stranger call him husband, and had spent 3 weeks refusing at every turn to make her into anything but herself. You know what I am going to say, she said. You read everything. You read it the moment I came up the path. I should like to hear it said, the Duke said, aloud, in front of the only witness that matters, which is the sea, because I do not entirely trust a thing until I have heard it spoken and watched the speaker not flinch. So she did not flinch. I drew you a condition once, she said. The truth, always, inside the lie. You kept it. You kept it even when it would have been easier to marry me on a Wednesday and win on a Thursday and never tell me the difference. You are the only person who ever wanted me to be the one doing the choosing. She stepped into him and put her hand flat on his chest, the way she had put it flat on the chart that first night in the library, over the place where a heart he had sworn off was none the less beating. Yes, I will marry you, on a day with no use in it, for no reason but that I love you, and I want to, and I am free to say no, and I am saying yes instead. She tilted her head, and the witchery came back into her, the dry warmth that was their private currency. There, read it. Did I flinch? No, said the Duke of Ravenscar, and kissed his wife at last on the cliff above the sea, for real, for the first and the truest time, with the cold spray rising, and the deed of her freedom crushed unregarded between them. No, you did not. You never have. It is the most maddening thing about you, and I intend to spend the rest of my life failing to cure you of it. They were married 3 weeks later in the small grey parish church in the town, with the banns read aloud all 3 Sundays, so that no man living could ever again say there was no record, and Lady Honoria wept and denied it, and Mr. Hale Bevan gave the bride away with a stammer that vanished entirely when it came to the words that mattered. It was a small wedding, and a true one, and every soul in it had chosen to be there, which Rosalind thought was the only kind of vow worth making, not the kind you fled into, but the kind you walked toward with your eyes open and your hands free. 3 years on, the map library at Ravenscar Hall was no longer the quietest room in the house. It was, in point of fact, frequently the loudest, owing to a small person of 2 years and a half named Margaret, for they had both wanted it, and neither had needed to say why, who had discovered that the long table was the perfect height for a child to reach up and pull a chart down upon her own head, And who was, her father maintained with grave pride, going to be an engraver, because she had already learned that the most interesting line on any plate is the one that has been crossed out. Rosalind worked there still, most mornings, while the winter light came in off the sea through the great north window. The crane plates had been cut and published at last. The true coast, the finished survey, the wolf marked honestly as the danger it was, and they bore, in the corner where the maker's mark went, not her father's name alone, but hers beside it, the engraver's daughter, made visible. Ships took their bearings now from her father's working, and her own hand, and somewhere out on the grey water, men who would never know her name came home alive on it. Roper she heard of only once, in a single reported line, the way you hear of weather in a country you have left. Struck from the Trinity House rolls, his yards seized and sold, convicted at last on the older charge as well as the newer one, and transported beyond the seas for a term that would outlive him. The uncle was simply gone, a name no one in the trade would speak. Rosalind did not gloat over either of them. She had won by paper in a lit room with witnesses, and a victory like that does not need gloating. It stands, the way a true chart stands, and lets the false ones fail on their own falseness. Tobias came into the library at the grey end of that winter afternoon, and found his wife at the window, with their daughter asleep against her shoulder, and the sea beyond them, going the colour of cooling iron exactly as it had on the night she called him a liar's word that turned out to be the truest thing either of them owned. He came and stood behind them both, and put his arms around the whole small, warm company of his life, and was quiet, because he was a man who still chose the smallest word that would do the work, and sometimes that word was none. "You are thinking something," Rosalind said softly, not turning, reading him the way she read everything. "Say it. The truth. Always." "I am thinking," the Duke said against her hair, "that I am very glad you seized a stranger in a chapel doorway and called him yours, on a night you were too frightened to know it was the bravest thing you would ever do." She smiled, and shifted the sleeping child, and leaned back into the warmth of him, and watched the cold sea she had once fled along go dark and harmless beyond the glass. A thing she lived beside now, safe, rather than a thing she ran from in the dark. "I drew 100 coasts, and never one of them was home," she said. She turned her head, then, and found his face, and gave him the last of it, the truest line on the last plate. "You are the place I stopped running toward and started running from no longer. I did not know, that night, that I was not escaping. I was arriving. Outside, the winter sea kept its old grey counsel. Inside, the fire was high, and the plates bore her name, and the child slept on. And the cursed Duke of Ravenscar, who the town had once sworn let his own household die, held his living household close in the warm-lit room, and did not let go. The end. Thank you for staying with Rosalind and Tobias, all the way to the last grey line of the sea. If their story moved you, if you felt the cold of that chapel doorway, and the warmth of that final fire, then please take a moment to let us know. Leave a like, and drop a comment below telling me your favourite moment, whether it was the claim in the chapel doorway, the logbook read aloud, or the proposal on the cliff with nothing left to win. I read every single comment, and they mean the world to us. They are what keeps our little storytelling corner alive. If you have not yet, subscribe and tap the bell, so the next story finds its way to you on a cold night when you need it. Another emotional story is waiting for you right now at the end of this video. Click it, settle in, and let your heart be swept away once more. Until then, thank you truly for listening to the very end. From all of us, the storytelling team. We will see you in the next one.